and our force is to get these guys going again in our community. I think if we wrap those into the end product, I think that we'll be better off.
As a former realtor and mortgage person who's done a lot of escrows, I have a problem with that. The port builds an industrial building and leases it to a tenant. There is never any escrow. So we never collect that impact fee.
So you can do
Given-
it based on inspections.
Well, but he's talking about
Occupancy.
consistency.
Well, you can do it based on occupancy.
Well, that's the original plan, is occupancy on industrial.
There are options to do what John wants.
And well, and the other problem is that the dirty little secret that nobody's been willing to talk about here is that there are a number of homes in your neighborhood that sold or financed conventionally by banks and went through escrow, and there was no occupancy permit.
And they were occupied.
There was never any final inspection,
Right.
and the builder is now in Belarus. That's the reason that sheetrock inspection is important. If you wait until final occupancy, it used to be that you could depend on the lenders and the escrow agents to require an occupancy permit.
Well,
We have plenty of history now to know that they're not doing that.
either way though, under this one, we would put a lien on the property up front.
Yes, before the building permit
So
was
it would be
issued.
tagged for title
So a
companies, everything
lien
else
would
out
be
there.
caught by a title company.
The lien would be caught, yes.
Yes.
We didn't have that before.
Joanne, what's your rationale for using sheetrocking as the trigger for the
For residential,
payment, yeah, on residential?
yeah, just for residential. It's my understanding from the building official that this is the time of, near the time of the typical last draw for a builder of their construction loan. So they're saving the interest of the construction loan from the period of getting their permit to sheetrock inspection. It's also to avoid the situation that Paul's talking about, where people move into a home, have never received a certificate of occupancy.
Well,
So it's to assure the city gets their money,
And I
and that
think,
gives the builder something.
and I think that's the trigger that everybody's trying to get to, is to, at least in my mind, is to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to stimulate construction, to stimulate new business, whether it's commercial, industrial, residential, that type of stuff, but make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. But if it is advantageous to them not to use that money up front, and we don't necessarily need it up front.
I like the sheetrock idea. I generally dislike it, but I like one aspect of it, and that is it gets the builder moving. Gives him an incentive to move along. Because he's gonna have to pay that at sheetrock, so he needs to finish this thing and get it on the market. So there's a good incentive for him. The thing that bothers me is I'm looking at my own neighborhood again, and it's not just the guy in Belarus, and I know the one you're talking about. We've got a builder that works out of Battleground. I just sued him and won. Took me 3 years. But I sued him because he built a house and the final inspections weren't done. The final grade wasn't done. The sheetrock inspection wasn't done. A whole bunch of things weren't done. And so this guy got away with murder. And I had to fix it, and then I had to sue him to recoup my cost. So I'm not sure that any amount of required inspections and that sort of thing are going to ensure that it's done right and that we get our money.
Well, I think
It's a good point that Joanne brings up. How do we ensure we get our money? And I saw that throughout here, especially from the schools.
And I think even the attempt at leaning the property or the actual leaning of the property sometimes can get interesting, whether, if that isn't caught, if it's not properly recorded on there, if it doesn't go through. On the other side, though, then it becomes a title company's problem and the title insurance to pay us back for what they missed.
Can we ask Mike's opinion on the
Yeah,
difference between
what I-
sheetrock payment and occupancy payment?
What I want to do is try and get as many comments from council as we can, then I've got a couple of questions for Mike, so
Okay.
if he'd be willing to answer.
If I may, let me underline something that Joanne said. The way that a house is built is that you typically have a developer who creates the lot, and then you have a builder who builds the house. The builder gets a construction loan. They get a small piece of that loan up front, but then they get the remaining pieces as they complete inspections. The final draw, the last piece of money that they get is sheetrock inspection.
So there's no use in delaying it to occupancy, is that your point?
Pretty much that, yes, because the big thing that people have been worried about is that they're paying interest on the money that they paid for permits and impact fees
6 months
through
ago.
through the entire process, whereas if
The
you,
amount that they would pay interest on is wholly accounted for by the time the sheetrock inspection is done. So
Right.
there's no use delaying the impact fees.
right,
I see. Mike?
May I
I'm
just
sorry.
say one other thing, is I'm trying to be very balanced in the fact that we have to remember why we collect the fees. These fees fund our capital facilities plan. Now, I do understand a builder's perspective in the fact that they shouldn't pay the fee until the impact occurs. But the other part is the fact is that we cannot jeopardize. We also, the city of Washougal, is in a financial situation right now. And we can't jeopardize that or put any burdens. We don't want any money not to be paid, because then who pays? The citizens pay. So I'm hoping that we can find a solution that is an incentive for the builders, but also protects us. And I keep going back to that. I think that if you look at, now, believe me, I am very against this is what other cities do, or this is what we've always done. But there must be a reason that the majority of the cities compared, for some reason, did not go to escrow or sale. They went to, which would be a compromise for all of us in this room, went to certificate of occupancy, but I would recommend occupancy inspection. But look at what we've experienced with all these houses that are unfinished. Of course, the other argument is there's no impact because no one's in them. But look at how many houses that aren't finished according to building standards, and they are occupied. I wait for the day that their house catches fire. The insurance company asks for a copy of their certificate of occupancy, and there was never one there.
And back away from it. Others? Other questions from council? Mike, if you're looking at this from an industry standpoint, and if you know that the reason that the city of Washougal is entertaining these alternatives is to do as much as we possibly can to stimulate construction, period. What are your thoughts?
I think just looking, I haven't looked at it from the construction or the commercial industrial side before. There might be some really good potential for that if you're looking to stimulate that side of things. On the residential, the way it's written, I'll submit some in writing comments to a lot of the way the actual program is set up. Really, you're talking about just 4,000, about half, roughly half of your total impact fee